Welcome to Simply Caroline, a podcast dedicated to women empowerment where we will discuss a bunch of different subjects such as life, parenting, love, business, money, relationships, healing, recovery, addiction, entrepreneurship, and so much more. A podcast I'll do my best to keep simple, fun, and relatable and bring you tools to help you better your life. So thank you for being here. And here's your host, myself, Caroline Blanchard. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us again this week. I have a special guest, Casey Edward. Casey, how are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me on, Caroline. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So today we're talking about something that no one wants to talk about. Tough conversations, like how to have those tough conversations. And just like we were talking pre-interview, that can apply to so many different, areas of our life. But let's go with first, what's your official, I would want to say official title, which on the other hand, I don't like putting an etiquette on someone, but how do you help people? Let's start with there.
Yeah, so I am a certified life coach. So I've been coaching for 5 years now, which seems kind of wild to me, actually. But it all started because in my 20s, I suffered from very bad anxiety to the point where it was pretty debilitating. So externally, I was happy and extroverted and no one saw that side of me. But inside, I was so crippled by what do people think of me? Am I enough? Am I skinny enough? Am I fit enough? Am I this, this, this? And I eventually had to say, this isn't working. I can't do this anymore. And so I grudgingly found meditation, which was the catalyst to my journey. I started to meditate, and that led me to understanding my mind and understanding my thoughts. And that actually got me into wanting to do life coaching so I could really understand what's going on in our mind, because I used to not realize I'm not my mind. And then once I started to realize that, I thought, why do more people not know this? Why do more people not know how to silence the mind when they need to, or use the mind rather than be used by it? And so that's where it started. And now I help people with everything from having difficult conversations that need to be had to past lives and all of the woo-woo stuff. So kind of all of the things.
It's weird how you called it woo-woo stuff, and I think that this is just the future. We're going more and more towards that because we understand more and more how there is other dimensions than just like our own little us right here thinking about the moment. And I love one thing that you said. You had to come to, understanding that you are not your mind, which that in itself is kind of contradictory because we think we are our mind, but really what's going on in there can be so not the reality, so conflicting. And I know that a big part is like society behind it, like all the limiting beliefs that are imposed to us when we're little. And I think for girls even more, like you have to be skinny, you have to be beautiful, you have to stay young forever, all of these things. So yeah, let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So for me, and I know that a lot of women, like you were just alluding to, had the same. So for me, it was about eating and it was about controlling my food. And there was such this narrative that I just believed from growing up of the skinnier, the better. The skinnier I am, the more worthy I am. And so it was just this constant narrative and constant thinking and planning of what I was going to eat and always being hungry. It ruled my life. And that, of course, was intrinsic with anxiety. This whole thing that I had going on was just this chaotic energy. And as I started to question the things in my mind, I think that's a really beautiful starting point for people if they're like, well, how do I even start to recognize that I'm not my mind? Well, when a thought comes in that makes you uncomfortable, just say, is that true? Is that true? Is that indefinitely true? That changed my life. Like if my mind said, you're fat, I'd say, is that indefinitely true? And then I'd follow up with like, says who? And you start to question this, which gives you space. And the more that you meditate and the more that you separate yourself from the thoughts, the easier it becomes to not believe everything that goes on in your mind. And so my journey with eating took me a very long time. But as I started to question everything I'd ever been taught about food and nutrition and movement, and just listen to myself, the easier it became, because we all know, and it's going to look different for everyone, but there's beauty in questioning everything.
Yes, and beauty is very relative, and
Mhm.
size is very relative. It
Mhm.
depends even which part of the globe you live in, you
Mhm.
know.
Yep.
I remember growing up with Italians, and they were telling me that I was sick and skinny, but that was just me.
Yep.
And you know, it cultures also determine certain standards. So that's why I was saying, like, society has a big part to do with that.
Mhm.
And I love how you say, you know, question what comes in. Is it true? And it's absolutely true what you're saying. Basically, if you think like I'm not skinny enough, well, is that true? And according to who? And according to which standards? And you know, there's so many things that you can follow up questions that will go with that. But may I ask you, how old were you when all of this was going on?
I'd say the eating started in high school. And then when I was in college, it got pretty bad being people were starting to comment on like, are you eating at all? And then outside of college, it was also pretty bad. I struggled with all forms of disordered eating in different ways. And when you're in it, but it's so funny because there was also this weird part of this story where when I would lose weight or the skinnier I got, people would say, "You look fantastic. What are you doing?" And it's like, I'm not eating. You know, I wish I had
Mm,
had the authority at the time to be like, I'm not eating. I don't eat very much. And that's like looking back, you know, I like have had to like hold myself and be like, oh, I love that version of me. But
mm,
in my 20s, it was pretty bad. And I remember one night, I was probably 24 or 25. I was standing outside crying and I like looked up at the moon and was like, I'm just gonna have an eating disorder for my whole life. Like I just remember thinking there's no way out. And that also was not true, but it felt very true at the time. So yeah, in my 20s mainly.
So, you know, there's so many things that I would want to comment on here because we're touching a lot of different subjects here. We're
Mhm.
touching, you know, mental health, we're touching
Yeah.
addiction, and eating disorder is an addiction.
Mhm.
Um, and also the fact that it all started in your teenage years. And I remember as a teenager, and I think I have teenagers too. And, you know, that's the period of life where you wonder who you are, you're trying to find an identity, you're trying
Mhm.
to find your place, you're trying to determine your future because adults tell you that you should know by now, you know, what you will do for the rest of your life. Like, so there's so many arrows thrown at teenagers that,
Mhm.
yes, that's also a very vulnerable place and a vulnerable period
Yeah.
to have these addictions that will, you know, jump in, whether it be eating disorder. And I think that's one of the common one
Yeah.
because uh, we can catch it right away. You catch it
Yeah.
quite often when the person is actually sick,
Mhm.
you know, but there's such a period before that. And then there's all the other more, you know, the addictions, we know alcohol, drugs, and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's pretty sad when we see that. And, you know, I'm just making this little comment here, which is a big comment, but to say we need to pay attention to teenagers
Yeah.
and really know that it's a vulnerable place to be in the
Mhm.
first place. So, you know, and I'm happy for you that in your 20s you finally found your answers, because you could have waited like me in my 40s and then, you know, it just prolonged. But
Yeah.
so what was the point when you said, you know, that's it?
So, not to be too graphic, but I used to make myself sick after meals.
Mm,
And there was this one time that I wanted to do it. And I had learned, this is when I had started to learn about energy and understood emotions a little bit and understood this discomfort is something other than the food. I started to realize this isn't about food, which was really pivotal. And instead of making myself sick, I will never forget, I sat in my bedroom and I sat with it. And it was it was like fire in my body. Whatever these emotions that I had been stuffing down with food or getting rid of or running from by controlling my food, it was all there. And I just sat with it and I cried and I felt it. And things didn't get better right away after that. It's not like a one-time heal. But after that, I never made myself sick again. And that was the first step. And I think it's like, I was running from emotions because I didn't know how to handle them or assimilate them. And so many people do cope with food or with controlling their food. And I'll speak for myself, at least I did. And so to sit with what I had been running from for so long made me see that sucked, but not as much as what I've been doing. And I can do that. If I just need to heal by being in the discomfort when it comes up, I can do this.
I'm so happy for you that, you
Yeah,
know, and
thanks.
you said it. I talk about addiction a lot, and it's a bit of the same thing, addiction to substances. We use them because we want to numb what's going on. So basically, we don't want to feel what's going on. And, you know, becoming sober is to master the art of feeling, basically. And it's really just that. Like, now that I'm saying it, that's the definition. Mastering the art of feeling what's going on. And yes, you know, the best way to get through something is to go through it. And let's talk a bit about that. Like, how after did you, because I don't want to focus necessarily on the eating disorder. I want to focus on, you know, how you got stronger after and how you started to actually help people get through the same thing. Because you're not necessarily consulting people that have eating disorders.
Right. Yeah. So after that, it's funny. When I started a meditation practice, for me, it comes back to meditation. I thought I would sit down, clear my mind, channel a book. Like, this is what I thought would happen because at the time, meditation was still a little out there when I started it and we didn't know as much. But what happens when you start meditating is shit hits the fan. So after that, my meditation practice got even stronger, which means you're sitting again every day now for 5 or 10 minutes with the things that you have not consciously wanted to see. And so even though my mind did not want to do it, and even though it took a long time for me to start to really be able to at least with non-attachment, watch the mind. I'll never say that it's quiet completely all the time, but watch with non-attachment. I started to really be able to watch the things that I had been running from and then feel them and say, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm going to sit with this. Why is this here? What is going on? And so the more I got uncomfortable, the more I got comfortable with being uncomfortable, the easier it became to see these emotions and see these things don't rule me. Sure, it's going to be uncomfortable. But again, what I was doing was way worse. Like, and it's not even like you said about the eating, just the anxiety of having these emotions in my body that were unresolved. Like if we have trauma stored in us and we haven't sat with it and felt it and gone back to the first time we remember feeling it, then it's just going to be in there. And so over time, it was kind of like dark night of the soul, but I don't know who only had one dark night of the soul. I had like 6 months to like years of dark night of the soul, but in a beautiful way. You know, it was like, I would have human moments and it would be fine, but I would also go into meditation and be like, today's going to be spicy. So, yeah.
Well, I want to come back to the meditation after quickly because I still cannot meditate. That's it's still something that stresses me out, which is, you know, it doesn't go together. But I want to touch on one thing because you're talking about anxiety here. And I feel like these days, everyone is talking about anxiety. It's like there's happy, sad, and anxious. Anxious has become just another way to another etiquette that we're putting on so many things, so many people. And the thing is, because you related to, you know, eating disorder and I related to addiction, but people who are saying that they have anxiety or whatever, you need to be careful because you are still having behaviors that are not necessarily pushing you through the extreme of having an addiction problem, but it certainly makes you do things that probably are not that healthy for you. And because it's done in smaller doses, people don't see, you know, sometimes until you touch the bottom of the barrel,
Mm.
you don't see that you have an issue. But I mean, we need to really be careful with that anxiety level that is manageable, but not really. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I think that these are a lot of the people that you see as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I think that the interesting thing about anxiety is there's a fine line between anxiety and excitement, which is odd because they are very similar feelings in the body that like, ooh, like I'm using my hands for anyone who can't, you can't see me, but there's like this whirring of energy in your body, and anxiety and excitement feel very similar. And so what I realized for me at least was when I would feel anything too extreme, I would essentially leave my body. I wouldn't stay grounded in my body. I'd kind of leave and run around and do things chaotically. And so the word embodiment is becoming popular. And how I like to think of embodiment is just coming back into my body. It's almost like you can see yourself leaving, like consciously wanting to leave, and you stay. So like I flex my stomach, I root my feet into the ground, I stay. And that helps me have the energy in my body in a way that doesn't feel frantic or overwhelming. But yeah, I used to just kind of be off the hinges. And so, like you said, it's interesting because to the outside world, I think that we're in a culture that the hustle is always idolized, and doing and doing and doing. It's like, yeah, like she runs a lot and she's healthy. Meanwhile, inside couldn't have been the more of an opposite story, but people are just seeing the hustle and the work ethic. But there's another side to the coin, which
And
is,
being busy is in.
oh, and I'm so
So
tired.
annoying.
It's so annoying.
To the
Yeah.
point that
So
when I'm actually busy and someone is asking me like, how's everything? And I want to say I'm busy, I just quiet down and I'm like, good, because I don't want to say that anymore.
yeah.
It's not cool. It's not
Yeah.
in.
I love that you said that because it's so true. We've put being busy on a pedestal. And so I think that's where a lot of anxiety comes from. I know that like I see a lot of women, especially, like we are very different than men. But I know I was listening to podcasts for men, not realizing that this is for their hormones or for their biology. And so, anyways, yeah, I was just running around in my masculine, so anxious, just trying to do all of the things all of the time. And I think that that's part of it is we don't know and we're not taught how to slow down, how to be in our body, and that it's safe to do both of those things.
Yeah, yes. So let's talk about, all of this brought you to uncomfortable places. And that's when I will let you say it, but basically that's when you decided, okay, that's one of the things that I need to teach now.
Mm. Yes. So I was really interested in manifestation and I coached specifically on that for a long time. And so, like, good vibes and how to think your way to a goal and feeling things and visualization, and all of that. But what I realized in my own life was I then found myself shying away from discomfort or shying away from uncomfortability. But that's part of life. And it's a beautiful part of life. And so as I started to lean into the times where, okay, I'm going to have a tough conversation at work, or I know this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation with my boyfriend or whatever it may be, we have opportunities all of the time. I started to I started to learn tools, and also I started to be like, this is okay. This is an exciting opportunity for growth. That's ultimately what an uncomfortable conversation usually is, an opportunity for change that we obviously need if the conversation is either being elicited by us or someone else in our sphere. So it's something that we get to do instead of have to do. And I used to be like, oh my God, especially as someone who used to be self-identifying as extremely anxious. And then I started to be like, no, I can do this. And it's safe for me to do so. And me speaking my truth is so important.
Yeah. And, let's talk about a conversation that you need to have with your adult kid, or even if they're not adult, there's
Yeah.
uncomfortable conversations, or with your friend,
Mhm.
about something you don't like. I hear it so often, like, oh, I love her, but there's this that I don't like about her. And instead of having these conversations, we keep everything inside, thinking I'll be polite and I'll be nice and I won't hurt feelings. But that just, with everything, it just like really buries everything. But how do you have those conversations, basically?
Yeah. And just to touch on what you just said, it's
Yeah.
so true. So many people carry resentment of they should know I'm thinking this, or they should
Mm.
know I'm feeling this. And we've never said anything. Like, people aren't mind readers. So how are they supposed to know? And when it comes to an interpersonal relationship, like a friendship or a child or a partner, even if we're not saying it, they can feel it. We all can feel when something is up. And so that just creates a barrier between us and our loved ones, when again, we could sit down and hash it out and go there. And so getting into it, to have a tough conversation or an uncomfortable conversation, what I found is you want to ask for a time to have the conversation. So can I have some of your time on Wednesday for an hour? So this is more professional for work, but even with a partner, could I talk to you later this evening for 45 minutes? So letting them know, that lets them know, okay, we're going to be having a conversation about something rather than blindsiding them. So saying, is it okay if we have a talk later, or asking your boss, is it okay if I get on your calendar for Wednesday for an hour? So
And
you
then
put the
they're like,
ball.
oh my gosh, she's dumping me.
Yeah. They're like, oh my gosh. But then they're at least aware. So they're
Yeah.
not bombarded. And then when you're getting ready to have the conversation, there are a few things I'd love to touch on. The first one being doing your best to go into the conversation at an emotionally neutral place. What a lot of people now, not to say that there's not going to be emotions that arise, but when you go in fiery and hot
Mm.
out the gate, we have to remember we're talking to another human with their own stuff. We're talking to another human with their own emotions. So if we can go in with our energy open, feeling grounded, and this is another part of it, being intentional. So you know your intention going into the conversation. My intention is to get a raise. My intention is to ask my partner for more help around the house. My intention is XYZ. So you go in open, you go in grounded, you go in thinking they're going to be open to this. Because another part of it is people will go into a conversation and be like, they're never going to listen to me. I'm never going to get the raise. You go in with these expectations that are going to limit you, and then you're going to only perceive that in the conversation. So going in open-minded and intentional, and then just having a few speaking points that you'd like to touch on. Because often, if we're to the point where we're having the conversation, we've already had many of the conversation in our minds at night, in the morning, while we're walking. And so to have a few points that you want to touch on in the conversation is important, because then you just don't word vomit on them.
I thought I was the only one like having those conversation in the forest when I walk the dogs, you know.
Everyone.
They're kind of looking at me like maybe
We're
I don't
talking to.
understand, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's and it's not always going to be us who are striking up the conversation. It could be that
Mm.
someone comes to us too, but the same goes for that. Being open-minded, checking in with your energy throughout the conversation, asking how you're feeling. It comes down to self-awareness. Because then when you know, I was self-aware, I was in my body, I was open the whole time. And again, it's not to say that you didn't feel any emotions, but then afterwards, no matter what happens, you can think to yourself, I was there. I was present. I spoke my truth, because not every uncomfortable conversation is going to go, quote unquote, well.
Yeah.
And just knowing who you were in that conversation is always going to make you feel better.
No, and I like what you say about going open. And for me, the way I interpret that is that you need to go in open and not with the conclusion of the discussion already made up in your mind. Because like when I'm walking and I'm having the conversation, clearly it ends up like I want it, but that's not how necessarily a conversation will go. Like it's not because you ask time to someone and that you have good intentions that they will turn around and be like, sure, I'll adjust to whatever you're saying. So not to go in, I assume, criticizing and just going in. If you go in open, you are open that you're at fault as well. And there's probably stuff with you that you trigger in whatever situation is. So be open that it's not just about the other person. So a conversation is not a place to go bash the other.
Yes.
And like I'm talking a bit more personal there, but it's the same thing, I guess, at work. If you're having issues with someone or something, there's always our perspective that shifts what the reality really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And to be able to be like, this is a human on the other side of this conversation with their own, again, with their own emotions. And because sometimes what will happen is even if we stay neutral, the other person might not be able to, especially if the discomfort from the conversation comes from us saying, I need this from you,
Mm,
or this is how I've been feeling because of the things you've been doing. Can we talk about that? And that could be especially uncomfortable for someone, because if you are the one saying, I need this or this, and you're not giving it to me, or whatever, then we just have to remember to see where they're coming from and to just notice what's going on with them as well. Like you said, this is conversation. So stepping outside of ourselves and saying, okay, what is their body language like right now? How are they feeling? What am I feeling from them? And checking in. How do you feel about that? How does that feel to you? Does this feel like a solution that would be beneficial to both of us? Things like that, so that they can see, okay, this is a mutual conversation. And again, I've had conversations like this where the other person is completely triggered, and then that's that. And it doesn't work out, because that's going to happen. And it was still better than carrying these hypothetical resentments in my head and not speaking my truth. Because then what happens is, even in quote unquote, worst case scenarios, something doesn't work out because something more aligned is going to. But that's the beauty of having these conversations and letting things change and shift, because we're human and they're going to.
yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't always end like we want it, but I do believe we're always going towards something better. So that's, but when I was listening to you as well, I was thinking about how I react. And I do have this flaw. I do have one flaw. It's that one. So I feel attacked quite often. Like if someone tells me, let's say, I don't like it when you talk to me like this, like in me, it triggers like, oh, I'm not good enough and blah, blah. So I feel attacked. And a lot of people actually feel attacked when you tell them what's like how they're affecting you or whatever. So we need to keep in mind also that for the person, it's the first time they hear what you're saying.
Yes.
Give them time to digest it. Because,
Yeah.
some people are like me and will feel faster. And the thing is, like, I sit with it for a few hours alone, and then I'm like, oh, it's true. But at first, my first visceral reaction is always, and that's like work in progress. Of course, I'm not perfect, but you have to remember that when you're talking to someone and it's difficult conversations.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. And even just having that awareness of, this is how I usually feel when something is brought to me about me. And sometimes in the conversations, we don't have the ability to walk away, like if it is a work one or whatever. And so you're going to be in it. And so something that really helps is for you to simply say, I'm feeling a little attacked. I know that this is because, communicating, open communication. I'm feeling a little attacked. I know that this is something I'll get to sit with later. And then when we say things like that, because I've been told, I feel like you're attacking me. And I love when someone tells me how they're feeling, because I can say, okay, what made you feel like that? Is attack an appropriate word? Was I attacking you? And often they're like, no, you were not. You were saying a fact, or you were saying your experience, because that's what you needed to do. And again, it's just getting in there, getting into the depths of the communication. And so again, this is going to look different. Like you might not be able to get that deep with a boss, but, or someone might just be too in their stuff, which I have also had happen, like just so in their stuff that they can't even hear what you're saying. But just trying to clarify things as much as possible, and to really clarify the word usage, because I know that for me, if someone says, I feel like you're attacking me, then that hits me in a certain place. And I'm like, that was not my intention. I'm sorry. So that's why clarifying, okay, what made you feel like that? Was it my tone? Was it XYZ? How can I change that then? And then you walk away with solutions for both of you.
Yeah.
And again, it might not be perfect, but even there is something so therapeutic about speaking your truth and being heard. And something I also like to say and really touch on is, being heard is not the same as being agreed with. So even if you're heard and received, the other person might say, I hear you, I'm holding the space for you, and I don't agree. And that's okay too. Because often
Yeah.
what we needed was just to be heard.
Yes, and I think that you touched like a big point there, because some people will be like, I made the effort of having the conversation with you, of scheduling time, of being calm, of this, that, and that, and you still disagree. So, I think that it's so important what you said there, being heard and not necessarily agreed with. And that's like the ego that needs to step aside a little and just be like, okay, I'm not there to convince people of my truth.
Ooh, yes, exactly. That's so powerful. And that's what this is all about, bringing our power back, not giving our power away to people who don't even know what we need, but we think they should know, or not giving our power away and going into victim mode. Because even if we're heard and then not agreed with, or even if we're heard and then nothing really changes, then at least the ball is in our court in terms of, I spoke my truth. What do I want to do with that now? Nothing changed, but at least they heard me. I feel heard. Is that enough? Yeah, great. I feel heard, but it's not enough. Okay, that's also okay. What am I going to do then?
Yeah, and one thing that I love about that is that, for me, that it's been such a process over years to really work on I am enough. I am enough, like in tons of situations. So when I do stuff like that and step up for myself, I'm proud of myself. I'm like, I stood up for myself. I, made effort for me. That's huge. And it does build your self-esteem, self-love, self-confidence, call it how you want, but it is very empowering. And no, you don't always get the results you want, because otherwise, like, life would be perfect. But it does give you this sense of, yeah, empowerment,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And then also something that I've realized, at least for myself, is I want to be surrounded with people who are open to having uncomfortable conversations. I want to be surrounded with people, because just as much as I want to tell someone I'm uncomfortable or I need this or whatever, I want people to do that for me, because that's how I will grow. So I want both sides of it. I want people who will say, didn't love that out of you, let's not do that. Or can you speak to me in a different way, or whatever it may be, because then that helps me grow as well. It's a mutually beneficial conversation, no matter how you look at it, if both people are open, like we said. But even if they're not, like, say someone's not open to having the conversation or hearing that yet, they're just not ready to assimilate that. That'll be with them though. And down the line, they'll take that with them and be like, okay, remember that time? Maybe there was something to that I could look into for myself. But yeah, I see it as helping each other. All of us helping each other have these conversations just helps all of us grow.
Yeah, and it gives deeper relationships, I find.
Yeah.
You bond on different levels.
Mhm.
And I assume that when people come see you, and I say people, it's mainly women, you told me, because that's that's the population you cater to the most. But um, I assume it's not a one-time deal. I assume it's not like, I need to have this conversation with this person. Like, what should I do? There's something deeper than that. There's like, because you need to be prepared on all sides that the person will 50-50 not agree,
Mhm.
50-50 tell you you're crazy,
Mhm.
all of these things.
Yep.
So it's a process, but it's also a process that helps you grow in everything.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also something for us to be aware of is our nervous system and how much it can handle. So when you say it's the first conversation you're having, you might be shaking, you might be so nervous. That's so normal. It's normal to shake. It's normal for our voice to break. It's normal to feel, oh my gosh. And I always do this with my hands because that's how it feels for me. But that's normal. It's normal to feel that way. And so after a conversation, even if you have to stay at work for a few hours later, go home and sit with what happened. Let your nervous system experience and also like grow, but do things that you need to do. Like if you need to go home and have some silent time and really process on your own and like come into your body, ask yourself how it felt, maybe journal. That's a really great way to just start getting used to this as well. Because I know for me, since I was in fight or flight most of my life, or at least since my teenage years, something like that, could easily set me off if I didn't say, we're safe. It's okay. I would hold myself after. I'd say, I'm proud of you. Just being with ourselves after, to make sure I train myself to know it is safe to go into that conversation, because we're going to do it again and again and again, and it's safe. And so like I hold my stomach, because that's where I usually feel the unsafe feeling. But so I'll hold myself. But yeah, so I wanted to touch on nervous system health when having these conversations is super pertinent as well.
And I guess that breathing exercise and everything can help as well.
Yeah.
So that brings me back to the meditation. Give me a trick, please, about like, and I've tried quite a few times, and I don't know, like, I know that when I walk in the forest, like I'll spend hours in the forest, and for me, it's very therapeutic.
Yeah.
That's my place where, you know, it seems like I'm entering a different world, and then I can think and everything, but I cannot sit and do meditation.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is change that story.
Okay. Yeah. You're so right. And I know all these things.
Yes, of course.
I know all these things.
Of course. So, and you don't have to say, I can, you could say, I'm open to. So just,
I'm
you can
open
like
to it.
bridge that. So I'm open to sitting and meditating, so that like you can ease into it. And the funny thing is, like, when we sit down, it takes time. I mean, even so, I've been meditating very consistently for a long time now, probably 7 years. And still sometimes I'll sit down, I'll set my timer, and I will be singing Taylor Swift for the first 2/3 of the meditation before I'm like, whoa, 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 reel it in, sister. This is not what we're doing here. And having a little bit of like levity and lightness around it. Like, it's not so serious. I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to watch my thoughts. But so everyone's kind of different. So some clients I have like having a count. So they'll count one. So like they'll breathe in 1, breathe out 2. They'll do that to a certain count. They like that. That's like their anchor. Some people like having binaural beats, which you can look up on YouTube. So they have just like binaural beats, which are playing to bring your brain waves down. Some people like guided meditations. I never liked those, but I know a lot of people who do, but also finding what works for you. So knowing that you have a place to go to, you're not going to be interrupted, and starting with like 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes. Even now, sometimes I'll just do a 5-minute, bam. But yeah, just being like, I'm open to this. What is your intention for meditating? What's the reason you want to do it?
Oh, being grounded and centering myself. And I think I'm doing it in different ways.
Yeah.
I'm not doing the official meditation or whatever, but I think that it's good to center yourself every single day and reevaluate.
Yeah.
You know, not you question your life. That's not what I said. Reevaluate every single day, like where I'm at, how am I feeling? Am I centered today? Am I aligned? You know, my head with my heart and my soul. It's, you know, whatever you believe in, being aligned is important. To keep questioning yourself every single day if what you're doing is aligned with your values and stuff like that. And I'm saying that for me, that's what I'm doing. And I'm not necessarily saying do that. That's what I'm doing, because I never want to lose myself again into, I was in addiction before. So, and I know that I was there because I was lost and looking for something else. So now I don't want to be looking for anything else. And the way not to go there anymore is to really make sure not to derail. Because sometimes, you know, if you don't ask yourself, you'll wait until you're completely derailed. And then you're like, oh, now I need to fix everything. So I don't want to get there anymore, ever.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That was really beautiful. Like alluding to that. Yeah. We have everything within us, you know, where it's like, sometimes we find ourselves reaching or seeking, like you were saying, but just being able to be like, okay, I've got what I need. What do I need? And also having those tools, you know, meditation's a tool. So this morning I woke up and I was kind of cranky, and I was like, okay, so I know meditation and a walk are going to get me into alignment. So just having those tools, seeing them as things to help you feel like your best self throughout the day.
Well, you don't look cranky now at all. So
it all worked.
Thank you for doing that walk and that meditation. But Casey, it's such a pleasure to have you on. I feel like we could chat for hours because you're super interesting and, it's a very educational as well, what you're saying. And I love to have different perspective of, and I think that we've heard about it so often, like tough questions or, life coaching, but we all have like, clearly my dog did not get the memo, but we all have our moments of, who I identify to, like we're saying meditation, there's so many different kind of meditation and everything, but hearing it from different people, then you can find what's going to be your thing. So it was so interesting having you. How can people reach you?
Yeah, so I have a website, caseyedward.com. And then I also have a podcast called I Can't Wait to Tell You. And there is an Instagram that goes along with that. I actually got rid of my own Instagram for my mental health. So now the podcast has one that I pop into, but I tried to step away from social media as part of what I'm doing to be more present. But yeah, so pretty much the website has everything that you would need. So like applying for coaching or finding the podcast or anything like that.
Well, thank you so much. And I will definitely go visit that and listen to your podcast. I didn't know you had a podcast. See, now, yay, you have a podcast. So Casey, thank you so much. To everyone out there, if you want to reach Casey, all of our information will be with the podcast. And I thank you for being here again this week, and I'll see you all next week.
Thank you so much for having me.